No Cap Fund presents The Representation Station. All right, we're live. We're back with another episode of The Representation Station. We have a very special guest on the show today. We welcome Casey Mattox to this station. Casey is a Christian, husband, and dad of 3. He's a constitutional lawyer and vice president for legal strategies at Stand Together and senior advisor at Americans for Prosperity. So Casey, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
We're going to go around the horn and introduce ourselves. We're going to start with our president, Walter Clapp, who's been on a plane up until like 10 minutes ago somehow. Walter, introduce yourself to the people tonight.
Well, hello, everyone. I feel a little bit less special this evening because I'm not the only lawyer here. I'm so glad to be in the company of Casey. So I am the resident lawyer. I'm here to help us define representation. What does it mean to be represented? Well represented, poorly represented, absently represented. And I need to remind everyone to go check out our website, www.y435.org. And you're going to find our Declaration of Representation. You're going to find a lot of other things. Our reading list recently got updated. Jeff, as you can see, he's a voracious reader, more so than me. And we just have a tremendous amount of content that we're putting out there, but also just referencing other content that other people are putting out there. Because at the end of the day, this is not a topic just for us to discuss. It's for everyone to discuss. If you are in America and you're concerned about what's going on in 2025, we're here for you. We have a solution. And so please go check it out at our website, and you can reach out, and I would be happy to talk to you, make representations to you, perhaps represent you. And from here, I'm going to pass it over to our treasurer, Roger.
Good evening. My name is Roger Scott. I'm a CPA in the state of North Carolina, although I happen to be in Colorado this particular week. I'm here because I feel like my representation is being stolen from me by my own Congresses, and that makes me unhappy. I'm being abused by my own government. We're all being abused by lots of people get abused by their government routinely, but every citizen's being abused by their government in the same way, and that's a problem.
Roger's our angry citizen. He's the one that keeps us level-headed.
I'm the angry old man. I'm the what am I? I'm the curmudgeon. That's me.
Yeah. I can't wait till I can get to the age where I'm a curmudgeon. I'm Jeff Mayhew. I'm the vice president. I am not a curmudgeon yet. I'm trying to be hopeful. I have 5 kids, and I want them to grow up in what I believe is the greatest country in the world that I have loved living in so much. And, I got political sometime in my 30s. I decided to educate myself, started reading. I found this little thing called representation showing up in book after book after book. I realized that we had a problem. I tried to go to my local representatives and talk to them about the problem. I realized that I can't because we don't have enough of them. So I decided to get involved, and that's what led me here. So, Casey, your turn. Share a little bit about yourself with the people tonight.
Wow. All right. So a little bit about myself. So I've been an attorney for 25 years. I'm a First Amendment attorney by background. And I think increasingly I've realized that if we're going to defend First Amendment rights, free speech, religious liberty, especially, if we're going to defend those rights, it fundamentally gets back to the structural Constitution questions. You need a Congress that functions, maybe chief among those, perhaps distinguishing myself a little bit from the focus of the rest of the group. Federalism would be my dream goal on how to fix the problems that plague us. But unless we address those problems, then civil liberties issues are going to forever be a fundamental problem. And so I think if we're going to defend the republic, if we're actually going to keep a republic, it's, seemingly impossible goals like the ones that we are talking about here are exactly the ones that there's no short circuit, right? You've got to do it. People have to actually stand up and argue for these things and keep working until they happen. And so I'm intrigued by Uncapping the House. And so that's why I've been sort of following y'all's work and advocacy for a while. And so happy to be on and discuss.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. So, as Walter mentioned, I read a lot. My wife would maybe like me to read a little bit less. She's tired of the book light at 3 o'clock in the morning, but what are you going to do? One of those books that I read recently while we were on vacation, actually, was Justice Gorsuch wrote a book over here of my right shoulder called Overruled. And so, for my first question for you tonight, Casey, is in his book, he makes the argument that our legal system is outdated, complicated, and bogged down with leftover procedures. So, how can we start to recover justice?
Yeah, so I just hinted at this just a little bit moments ago. He doesn't mention an Overruled because the book came out just before, but he doesn't talk about the Loper Bright decision that my colleagues at Americans for Prosperity Foundation were integral in making happen, and folks at NCLA, my friends over there. But I think those sort of admin state decisions, those questions about how Congress functions or doesn't function, and the way that it has therefore just punched everything over to the administrative state and asked unelected bureaucrats. You talk about representation. There's no better example of the lack of representation than the fact that we spend all of this time and energy trying to figure out who's going to represent us in Congress, right? And all of the debates around the redistricting fights and everything else. And at the end of the day, for the most part, the whole question is, who are we going to elect to decide to represent us on Fox News and MSNBC, while other people in Washington, D.C., whose names we don't know and who we have never elected, continue to make law after law after law that actually impacts our lives. And so I think in that sense, Justice Gorsuch is absolutely correct. It's not just the abundance of laws, an abundance of laws where we have some say in the process, direct say in the process. We can hold people accountable for them. That may not be good, right? We may oppose that, but we at least have a phone number of someone to call to say, stop making stupid laws. It's an entirely different thing where people that we can't vote out of office are the ones that are making those laws. And so I think he's spot on, and it sort of breaks down confidence in representative government if you've got if people just sort of get used to this. This is just how it works, right? That's not a good place for a supposedly democratic people to be in, when they just sort of get used to the idea that laws get made and I have no say, I have no voice in the process. That can't last very long.
Yeah, we call that on the show learned helplessness. When you
Mhm.
grow up with something that you're made to be used, this is just the way things are. And honestly, like as I mentioned a little bit in my intro, I didn't get involved in politics until much later. I wasn't a great student in high school. I started a small business and I really didn't care about politics. I love football. And that's really where I wanted to pay attention to. But as I got older and the government interfered a little bit in my business and I felt like I didn't have a say, I decided to maybe I should know a little bit more. And that was the first thing I noticed is when I started getting involved and knocking doors is people were just like, well, that's just the way that it is. Like I would ask the question, why do we have 435 representatives? Well, that's just the way that it's always been. Actually, no, it is not always the way it's been. We had much less at some point in time. You have to understand that our population has grown significantly, right? And people were always shocked by that. They were like, whoa, wait, you're telling me that this isn't written into the Constitution? No, it's not written into the Constitution.
Right.
Wait, Jeff,
Go ahead.
quick segue. Was it Deflategate that got you?
No, it was not the Deflategate.
Okay. All right. Keep going.
So I'm gonna spin this just a little bit to Walter and Roger, I'm not sure which one of you want to go first, but I'll let Walter go first because he's the lawyer, right? So, um, how will uncapping the House help us with the justice system? And before you answer, for our audience, a little bit of like historical context. So, one of the books I'm reading right now is Martin Van Buren's biography, and in it they tell the story of the legal system in the 1800s in New York. And a young Martin Van Buren created a commission that led to revised statutes. And the way they describe the legal system in New York is very similar to the way that Gorsuch describes it in his book. So, as we're looking for hope, right? When we have big problems, we can find solutions. We've done it before. We can do it again. So, tell me, Walter, how is uncapping the House going to help us resolve this issue?
I imagine that uncapping the House will help resolve the undue burden that's been placed on the judiciary in a similar way that the Montana judiciary was helped in the 70s when they rewrote their constitution. So Montana has the most recently revised constitution, as far as I'm aware, and it happened in reaction to the copper barons basically having complete control of the state. And the people and the lawyers banded together to rewrite the Constitution and give the people more rights in the judiciary. But what I think is important to understand is that process was respected and trusted. And the problem that we face today is, people are calling for reform to the judiciary, but who would do the reform? Well, that would be our Congress. Well, the people don't trust our Congress. So you're asking for an untrusted branch of our government to reform the last vestige of trust we have in our country. And I think that probably just leads to something much darker than where we are currently. And so uncapping the House, for me, that is the only situation in which I could participate willfully in reformation of our federal judicial system. I think anything short would just lead to more distrust. And so ultimately, I think trust is the number one commodity in 2025. And so if you want to build more trust in the judiciary, it happens through Congress. And so we have to start there. And so it comes back to first things first. And I think there's a lot of things that are right in our judiciary, and people can quibble about what is wrong or right, but ultimately it should be our representatives. It should be the learned men and women who we elect as our representatives who should do the quibbling, and we should trust their judgment where they come down on those hard questions. And frankly, we just don't have that right now, and so that's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely need more elected people that we can, if we elect them and we get to know them and there's more of them, there's going to be more trust there. And you mentioned, there are spots that are trustworthy, and what I point to the Supreme Court, I know that it gets a bad rap here and there. People are always attacking it for different reasons, but in my study of history, when America's kind of gone off the tracks a little bit, the Supreme Court sometimes pushes it further off and sometimes pulls it back. And I feel like this is a moment where, especially Gorsuch, with some of the rulings that they've had over the last few years, all of those rulings are pointing to the same place, and that place is Congress. They're telling us where the problem is, and they're telling us, like, we can't fix it as the judiciary. You guys have to fix it there, and I think that is a good thing. You may not agree with every ruling that comes out, but you can at least respect the fact that they are pointing America in the right direction. If you're looking for somebody to trust and a place to trust, I think it's a good place to start. So, Roger, spin it over to you. Why is uncapping the House going to help us?
Yeah, it's not going to be a flashy, flash cut kind of thing. It's going to take time. It's going to percolate, right? To Casey's point, we have a lot of staff, unelected staff that are writing these things. We have lobbyists writing the bills and so forth. We need to have more people in the Congress, elected members, to do the work and to make committees work again. So we have fewer of these outside people. That's one thing. The discussion is not relevant necessarily to this question, but the discussion earlier about Gorsuch's book, the preponderance of laws, where all this, we're a country that's a rule of law, right? That's why we have all this stuff. So it's you gotta be careful. It's a fine line between streamlining it all and streamlining too much. So that's the thing there. It, to the extent that we can reinstill trust in Congress by having more people that you're more likely to see in the grocery store, people you have a better chance of having a conversation with. That's the most important thing. Whatever other reform we want to do, we have a higher chance of success when we uncap the House. So to restore trust in the judiciary, to expand the court, whether that's the Supreme Court or the district courts or we need more judges. The federal judiciary has said that themselves. We're understaffed as judges. So that would be another way we could get things done more quickly, would help restore trust. That wouldn't result from uncapping the House, but I'm just throwing it in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I, and I just, for our listeners, so in addition to Loper Bright, which Casey mentioned, we've got West Virginia versus EPA. That's a 2022 decision. SEC versus Jarsky, a 2024 decision. Corner Post versus Board of Governors. That's another 2024 decision. I think in each of these, and Casey, correct me if I'm wrong, we do see, as you mentioned, Jeff, the Supreme Court saying, hey, Congress, this is your job, right? These are areas where you need to make your intent clear, and you need to kind of hold the reins. And so I would agree that we do see that from the Supreme Court, Jeff, and I'll pass it back to you and Casey.
Well, and let me just add there too. I think that the times where the Supreme Court has like almost all of the cases that have gone to the Supreme Court where there are sort of big fights over federal power, right? In the last 15 years, it's almost all been some agency doing a thing, not Congress. Where it has been Congress, it almost looks like the court bends over backward, excited that they actually got together and passed a law, right? Like the TikTok decision is one where it's objectively a little surprising that it's a unanimous vote to uphold the law banning TikTok. But I have to think that the court is just absolutely giddy that they got together in each chamber and they voted and passed a law, the same law, and they sent it to the White House for a signature, and they just don't want to get in the way of that, right? And I mean, it's like they're, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was Ted Cruz had challenged a provision of campaign finance that was struck down 2 or 3 years ago. I think the last time an act of Congress was struck down was the portion of Obamacare that dealt with expansion of Medicaid, right? That's a long time ago so it's just rare. The court has that Congress is actually doing its job, and I think the court is basically trying to make it do its job, and it does not want to get in the way when it's even remotely attempting to at this point. So,
yeah. Which, by the way, he hasn't signed that bill yet, has he?
I think September, if I'm not mistaken. It was signed by Biden, right? So the question is he actually going to
enforce it? Is what I meant.
As it is, right? But if I'm not mistaken, I think Constitution Day, the 17th, is the next deadline for TikTok, and we'll see how dead that dedeadline is.
After that big military parade, it's ruminating.
It's right.
Okay, so for our next question tonight, we got another book I'm going to talk about right over here. This is The Right of the People, Osita Nuevu. He suggests that we need a new American founding. He wants a more democratic government, and he seeks to replace the Constitution. So some historical context for this, if you guys haven't read the book, because it is fairly new. He compares this to the second founding after the Civil War and to the Constitutional Convention when we were dealing with the problems of the Articles of Confederation. So my question to you, Casey, is, do you think we need a new founding? And should we write a new constitution, or should we build on the one that we already have?
Yeah, I'm of the view that true constitutionalism has hardly been tried. And so, most of these arguments for we need a new constitution don't grapple very much with what the actual constitution would be. I know we've got a separate question later on coming about Yuval Levin's book, where I think he does an able job of basically laying out an argument that I would make it, which is essentially just that we really should give this thing a try. It's created to give us an opportunity, not necessarily for to make laws that we all, that 51% of us agree on, but it's created for the purpose of helping us disagree well, right? Figure out what we can agree on and get that done, and then how to function in a society where we're going to disagree, instead of how do I get to 51% of the population so that I can impose my will on the other 49%. Most of these arguments for quote democracy from a lot of folks who want to change the Constitution ultimately get down to, but the majority is frustrated because it can't get done what a bare majority of people want done. And to that, I would say that's a feature, not a bug. Now, there's all sorts of alternatives that are available, right? Even under the Constitution, if we actually just made it like, if we gave this thing a try, and that includes things like, again, to go back to my favorite argument, federalism. We are largely have sort of separated out into blue and red areas and blue and red states, and I think you could sort of have your cake and eat it too if we wanted to. You could have a national government that allowed us to be able to disagree well, and your state or your locality could reflect more what you want things to look like. What you have to give up on in order to achieve that is really, really caring exactly how people on the other side of the country in places you will never visit, how they live, and letting them live a little differently than you would prefer, right? If we can do that, I think we can actually just exist under this Constitution. But I think the biggest disservice that we give to kids right now in education, for example, in civics education, for example, is that we tend to walk them through what the Constitution says and give them the impression that that's the government that they are living under. So then when the kids look around and see that things don't seem to be going very well, the natural implication is that it's that thing's fault. It's the Constitution's fault. And I think we've got to do a much better job of showing kids not just what the Constitution says, that there's, the Congress makes the laws and the executive enforces the laws and the judiciary weighs in. Like, don't just tell them what it's supposed to be, but tell them how things are actually operating and show them that there is a gap between the design and the current function. And that probably should be where they put their focus on trying to solve the problem.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I don't think that we've like fully ever embraced our system as well as we can, and I think a lot of that had to do with slavery at the beginning. You had the, I talk about it a lot. I've written about it in the Hill. The 3/5 compromise. It skewed the balance of representation. The Democrats, once they organized under Martin Van Buren, whether he intended it to happen or not, they were able to use that power, coincide with the executive, expand federal power, expand the states to gain representation in Congress and keep control because they didn't want to lose their interest, which was slavery. And then post-Civil War, after we balanced that with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, representation for the first time in our country was balanced. But then we started bringing in a whole bunch of new people, and I don't think we were prepared for it. And I think ultimately the capping of the House, what was it, the 17th Amendment being changed, or the 17th Amendment, all those things had to deal with the rise of corporate power and the influx of population, and I just don't think that we were prepared or able to deal with it properly. And I think you're right. I think if we looked at things through that lens and we tried to go back and repair some of the mistakes that we've made, we'd have a better. The system's really good the way that it was written, honestly. And yes, it's not perfect, but nothing ever is. And I think that we would be best. But that brings me to my question for Walter and Roger. Why is uncapping the House a superior reform to rewriting the instead of rewriting the Constitution? And how will it help us build on the foundation that we already set? Roger, you want to go first this time?
I don't know. I don't know that it necessarily is superior to writing the Constitution, other than the fact that to try and rewrite the Constitution is a really heavy lift. Uncapping the House is a much easier, much more viable goal. So there are things about our Constitution that I would like to see rewritten. Yeah, for one thing, it's one of the hardest in the world to amend. We should make it easier to amend the Constitution so we're not shackled with the previous generation's, bullshit. I believe that uncapping the House is the first thing that we can and should do before we reform any of the other stuff, and that would include the Constitution. Walter's made the point several times. If we try to call a constitutional convention, that's still going to have to go through Congress, and we don't trust Congress. We need to increase the House and try and build that trust before we try to go down the route of telling people to trust Congress to put together a fair and productive constitutional convention.
Osita would agree with you. He quotes Thomas Jefferson at least 3 times in this book, telling us that I can't remember the exact quote now. I should have wrote it down, but the government belongs to the living, not to the dead, or something
Yes.
to that effect. And look, I think there is a little bit to be said to that. I don't think that we should make it easier to amend. I think that's a feature, not a bug. I think that's a good thing. I think if you have a larger body, if you have a more engaged populace, you elect better people, you're going to be able to amend the Constitution when you need to. And I think ultimately by expanding the House, you'll get to a place where you do write some constitutional amendments. But I'm going to let Walter go here before I ramble on. What do you say about that?
So, I'll agree. So Article 5 of the Constitution provides for its amendment. One of those provisions we've used 27 times. There are 27 amendments to the Constitution. They were proposed by Congress and ratified by the states. Interestingly, the most recent passed amendment, the 27th, was actually ratified in 1992, but it originally was proposed with the Bill of Rights along with Article the First, which would have fixed a right to representation. And to Roger's point, he's absolutely right that ultimately Congress proposes the amendment. So it does have to come through Congress, which is a body we frankly just don't trust, and I'm not sure how we get to trust without uncapping it. And also, they would call a Article 5 convention. So I used to be a big proponent of a Article 5 convention of the states when I was in the Senate, working under Senator John Cornyn in the Senate Judiciary subcommittee on the Constitution. I thought the Article 5 convention of the states was it was the only way for us to rectify, or mesh our Constitution with the internet reality in which we live, right? And I'm thinking principally about privacy concerns. How do we not have a totalitarian state, which is something that I worry about, and so for a long time I was like, we have to have a constitutional convention because then we could get amendments that we could have a shot at fixing some of these issues, these glaring issues. And but then you read it closely, and the first words of Article 5 are, I'm reading here, the Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And so you have to realize there that, that means Congress is writing the rules. Well, let me tell you, if you get to write the rules of the party that you're having, it's your party, right? You get to decide what is proposed, how it's debated, how long it gets debated, how does it make its way to a floor vote? Right? The whole reason we want to uncap the House is because the parties have control of the rule book, and as a result, the people have little say, right? They don't really care what the people have to say because they have the rule book. So I don't think we need to rewrite the Constitution. I think the Constitution is beautiful. I think Article 5 of the Constitution is frankly quite beautiful in its simplicity and shortness. And we just have to recognize what the words say, right? They say something very, very profound and powerful. You want to change it? Here's how you do it. So organize and do it.
And that's what we're doing. We're organizing. I mean, I'm not necessarily, advocating for a constitutional amendment right now, but I am definitely advocating to uncap the House and give us a little bit of say back. Casey, I want to come back to you. Do you have anything to add to what Walter or Roger said there?
I know I agree with the concern, I think, around the Constitutional Convention. I mean, I think that my typical argument, though, is just that, this is a variation on your point that we don't trust Congress. You think about who would make up the convention itself, and it's largely going to be members of Congress. And one of my favorite points to make is that for all of the complaints, and we've hinted at this already, for all the complaints about the Supreme Court, and you have members of the media and members of Congress talking about how people have lost some respect for the Supreme Court. It's by far the most trusted branch of the federal government. Congress is by far the least trusted branch. And at least on some polls, there are significantly more people who report having been abducted by space aliens than who believe that Congress is good at its job. So that's where we are. And I don't wait. I mean, I'm not here to say anything negative about those people. So, anyway, that if you called a constitutional convention, members of Congress would be largely the people who would populate a constitutional convention. So, we need a reset on this process in some way to be able to build some confidence that this is actually a group of people that we would want making rules to govern us.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And you mentioned something in your first response about opportunity, right? And I think ultimately, there's a lot of discussion about like rights and freedoms and everything. And I think what we all should aspire to is freedom to opportunity. Like you may grow up or be born in a certain place or at a certain level, but in America, and I don't know if you guys watch The Gilded Age at all. Anybody watch The Gilded Age?
I have not. No.
Oh, it's fantastic.
It
there's
sounds
this,
great. I already like it from
yeah.
the title. So.
But there's this great scene in The Gilded Age where one of the butlers, he creates this device. It's an invention, a clock invention. He partners with one of the sons of the wealthy on there in New York City. They sell the invention. He becomes one of those people. Right? He goes from the bottom to the top overnight, right? And he goes, and the quote is something like, "In America, you can be anything." And that's really what's really great is that opportunity that you can be anything if you put the effort in and the willingness in. And obviously, like we haven't been perfect, and there's barriers everywhere for everybody. But typically in America, those barriers have been climbed and conquered time after time. And I just think that this is another opportunity for us to climb and conquer some barriers. All right, next question. So Nick. I don't know how to pronounce your name, Nick. I'm sorry. Nick Toriano. He wrote this book called The Primary Solution, and he suggests that the cure to our political division is that we must reform the primary system. And I think, Casey, you were on the Reagan Caucus podcast, were you not? And I know that
Yep.
Thomas and those guys are really into, attacking the primaries and trying to elect better leaders, which I think is a fantastic idea. So my question to you is, what primary reform do you believe would serve the American people best?
All right. So I generally am pretty down on primary reform, other than I think right now I think it's a problem that the parties actually have very, very little power at this point. They are bystanders in the process for the most part. The party infrastructure itself are bystanders in the process. And, I think historically you've had the parties in a position where the parties were looking to try to build a coalition to get people elected, and to that was the purpose of the parties. I think that some of the campaign finance decisions and or laws that have been passed have actually weakened the party itself, um, to the point that that they're largely labels that people apply to a general group of people, but they're not the actual energy behind choosing candidates, trying to build a brand around a party, and getting people elected. So, I think I'm less enthused, I think, by most of the sort of monkeying around with the party process, because I think ultimately that won't tear up too much. Now, I will say this is slightly more fun. Um, on the presidential side, I, it is way too long. You have on the presidential elections run for an 18-month long period of time, and it's insane. Um, and I would lean into our Americanness. I would have and then you've got the whole process of Iowa and New Hampshire sort of running the show, and choosing first, and South Carolina third, and all of that's mess. Um, I think we randomly select. You basically have the primaries for president over a period of time that's like May and June of election year. That's when you have the primaries 2 weeks apart over a four different election periods, and basically a quarter of the states are voting each of those four. And we could have, like, halftime of the Super Bowl, we could have the drawing to decide which states go which. We could just have we could get people really engaged with this process. Who gets to go weekend one. So I would basically compress that whole process and have the presidential election be something that's happening much later in the cycle rather than the way we do it now. But I'm not sure that any of the actual sort of primary reforms that I've seen, I think, would matter all that much. So that's where I am.
Yeah, so in the I'll let you get to your question. One second, Walter. I just wanna
Okay.
So in the book, he talks about exactly what you talk about, is that the parties have less power. He talks about that, the primary system was like the modern primary system kind of came about at the end of the progressive era as, trying to curb corruption, right? And I think you're right. I think the parties have less power over the primary process right now because of the campaign finance rules. I do think that uncapping the House helps with a lot of that stuff.
Mm.
And I'm not opposed to the idea of changing the primary system. The presidential part that you mentioned, he talks about that as well. The idea that, like, these certain states have more political power than other certain states, swing states. So you know what? I hope I'm not confusing that book with the other book, but I gotta go check my notes. But
Well,
it
I
is.
have to say, by the way, that I've just made enemies all over Iowa and New Hampshire. Like, I will never be able to set foot in those places.
Well, you
So
just
it's
ended
all
your
over.
presidential run before it ever
I did.
started.
It's all over from here. That's
Uh,
right.
So, Walter, go ahead and ask your question, and then I'll come back and ask the question to you
Yeah,
guys.
I just want to drill into this idea that the parties are somehow have lost power in the process, and so I think I'm thinking obviously of congressional races particularly,
Yeah.
and it seems to me that the parties, and in particular either party leadership. So if the party has a president in power, or if the party does not, whoever is the leader, right? So the president, or speaker, or minority leader, it seems like they have a tremendous amount of influence in each and every one of the congressional races, which might actually be competitive. And then also in the potential, like, gerrymandering decisions that are getting made at the state level, and so I guess I see, and Jeff echoed this. There are obviously some changes in how much a party can spend. Um, but I don't know, Casey, if you could just elaborate a little bit more about how you see the parties
Yeah.
having lost influence.
Yeah. No, I think you certainly have, like, the NRSC,
Yeah.
and those entities, and specific members of Congress who have sort of built a war chest and use those dollars to be able to support people. Those, like, they have a lot of power, right?
Okay.
But I would basically ask everybody who's watching right now, you're all very politically engaged. Quick, next 5 seconds. Who is the chair of the Republican National Committee?
Trump's daughter, right?
I think that's correct. Right?
I think it's Laura Trump.
For most of us, you hesitate for a moment, like, wait,
Well, yeah,
who
but
is
only
that?
because it was Watley until recently, but he's resigned because he's going to run for Tillis'
So
seat.
I think that the reality is like, and certainly DNC, like who's the chair of the DNC?
I don't know.
I don't know
I'm
either.
not 100% sure.
Is not Jamie Harrison anymore?
Historically, this would have been something that that politically engaged people would have known, because the parties themselves had, as parties, would have had a significant amount of power. I will say, I mean, when you get to the I'm mostly thinking of this from the perspective of the presidential race, where the parties very sort of obviously have not made as parties decisions about who will represent them. People became the candidate, and that's where they were.
Yeah.
But if you think about one of the obstacles to if you significantly reduce, right, if you've got a much smaller population that you are competing for votes over, at the House level, it's a much cheaper campaign, and you require many fewer dollars, and that absolutely changes the dynamic. If your name already carries with it personal knowledge of who this person is, or at least people who know this person in my community, that's running for Congress, that would be a fundamentally different different question than one where you're trying to find sort of the face of the party, in a particular location where you've got 700,000 people, or more, that they're going to represent, and almost no one is going to have any actual knowledge of who this person is. They just see a brand, right? It's a different calculus.
All right, so I'll go to Walter. How so uncapping the House will come with lots of hesitation because of the incentives for getting elected. My thought process here is that primary reform might encourage people to want to uncap the House, because they'll feel like there'll be a more secure system to electing a better set of representatives. What type of primary reform would you support?
I support a primary reform where the Democratic Party doesn't get to decide that Kamala Harris doesn't get primaried. That would be my personal quibble, I guess. I want competition, right? I'm a red-blooded American. Like I want us to fight.
No, not fight.
In the
compete.
competition of ideas. Okay, right. Yeah, metaphorically. All right. I want a level playing field where we know what the rules are, and I want to allow the meritorious candidates to rise to the top and not have cherry pickers picking from the top. Which my perception is that we've had people cherry picking who gets to go and who doesn't, and I think there's a perception that Trump somehow broke that. I remain somewhat skeptical, but that is the narrative, and what I want is a rules-based system with a level playing field where good people can compete for the trust of the American people.
Roger, your turn. I heard you. I know that you were looking up. Who did you figure out who the president of the DNC is?
Yeah, I had Jamie Harris on my mind, but the new guy's Ken Martin. That was a few months back.
Okay. Well,
what the hell is Ken Martin?
He's from Minnesota. He's been the chair of a little party up there, the Farmers, something or the other.
Okay.
Whatever.
Breaking news. We're breaking news right here, live on the show.
That's right.
Oh, no. It's been months. If it was news now, I wouldn't have been able to look it up. I like the jungle primary. throw them all in the ring and sink or swim.
Yeah, well, I think this is a good time to mention that next week on the show we have Sarah Wolk from 5 Star Voting on, which is a election reform idea. It is, I think, in competition with RCV, which is kind of the most popular election reform out there nowadays. It's the one that the book that Nick wrote supports. It's also supported in Osita's book as well. And I think, there's been a lot of ranked choice voting. I participated in a ranked choice voting election. I think that there are pluses and minuses to it. I do like the idea of making, let me start with this. When I first showed up to vote at a ranked choice event, I had no idea that it was going to be ranked choice voting. The party was in control of the process, the local party, and it was for the Governor Youngkin's primary when he was running against Pete Snyder and Amanda Chase and all those people. And I was very confused. I had no idea what I was doing, and there was nobody there to tell me what to do. So, and I think at first I thought this was a very bad thing. Like, you're going to make it's very easy to nullify your ballot if you don't understand what you're doing. You've maybe put 2 lines in the same spot. You've misranked somebody. So I think there's some issues there if you don't have proper education. But the more I thought about it, and if we're talking about a primary and we're talking about a smaller set of voters that maybe are more engaged, because typically primary voters are a little bit more engaged. They're the people that are following these elections year round. They're different than other ones. I don't necessarily think that it would be a bad idea to make it. It's not that it's a more complicated idea. It's a more detailed idea. You might get some different results that, the parties would be a little bit happier with in that process because, ultimately I want my primary voters to be highly educated and able to go through this process and successfully elect people. And maybe this is a way, to handle that. But, I'm still kind of like researching and trying to figure that out myself, what I would support. But I like the idea of like the parties just picking the nominees, to be honest with you. Like I think that was a pretty good process. It's like your party.
Boo.
I know. I have, there's something to be said for a closed door room. Okay. A smoke filled room gets a lot of bad raps, but I got to tell you, I think that it's not the worst thing in the world. I've, just working in my industry, whenever I'm trying to design a logo for a customer, for a school or a PTO, right? If I'm dealing with 1 or 2 people at the top, the process is simple. If those 2 people then email it to all of the people in the process and everybody gets a vote, now it becomes wildly complicated. And so like, in the primary process, I think it is. I think there is something to be said for, and part of the reason is the Republican and Democratic Party own the elections. You can't get in if you're a third party, which is going to bring me to my next question. So in Lee Drutman's book, Breaking the Two-Party Dune Loop, he suggests changing our system from single-member winner-take-all districts to a system of proportional representation with multi-member districts. Casey, actually, let me give some historical context for the listeners out there. The Constitution doesn't require single-member districts, and we did used to have multi-member districts until the Apportionment Act of 1842, which mandated single-member districts. Also, in Drutman's book, he points out the fact that while we do have a 2-party system now, and that party system kind of have stranglehold on power, that if you go back 40 or 50 years ago when the House was more representative body, we actually had a secret 4-party system, right? Where you had conservatives and progressives kind of on both sides of the aisle that would swing back and forth and things would get done. And I think ultimately that's what this idea is supposed to create. So I'm curious, if we uncap the House, Casey, what do you think we should do? Should we go single member or multi-member districts?
Yeah, so I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that. I mean, my initial reaction to multi-member districts is that they feel less representative. Like you lose the representative piece. What I would what I would prefer, if I'm going to flex on something around the redistricting conversation, I would want to flex more around, um, you know, trying to keep districts as close as possible to the same size, but having slightly more flexibility with that for the purpose of uh, basically drawing districts so that they follow natural geographic lines. So that you actually have sort of a community, whether it's a county or a city or something that identifies itself as being an area in a real way, right? We think of ourselves as one group of people that are being governed by a member or a group of groups of people, right? Multiple counties is needed, but as opposed to the situations where you've got an individual county that's carved up three different ways, um, and you just sort of lose you know uh, any feeling of connection to the district you're in. So that's where I would flex instead of the if you have up to a 10% maybe of flexibility in terms of the size of the district, but I would sort of lean in on trying to make it so that the districts actually represent geographic areas and follow those boundaries, even if it means some are slightly larger than others.
Yeah, and we had Brad Smith on the show like about a month ago now, and he talked about this in detail about how districts are decided, how they come up with the geographic
Yeah.
implications of them. So if you're listening out there and you want to know more about that, you can go to our YouTube page. You can find that as I think it's episode 9, 8, 9. It's a representation station, Brad Smith. It's on there. You can watch it. And to your point about the geographic, we asked on last episode, we asked Jacob Winsick from the New Rhino Coalition, what he thinks is a good leader. And in his answer, he wants somebody that's tied to the community, right? And I think there's a geographic element to that when it comes to representation that you might lose out, if you have a multi-member district, like if you uncap the House, you have 770 members, is what Droopman proposes in his book. It's possible that my district, VA10, doesn't actually change size. I might have 4 members in it now, and they might all be elected from Loudoun County, and Fauquier County is still not represented,
Right.
So I
Yeah.
think that's, something to consider for all the listeners out there who want to uncap the House, who want to move representation forward, is you have to start thinking like, what type of system do you want going forward?
Well,
And
and I
go
can
ahead.
see the argument. Sorry about that. I think the idea of multiple parties, everyone wants. People will often make the case for, well, we need 3 parties. I think the argument that you're making there around expanding it is more, we have 2 parties, but the 2 parties include more diversity amongst them, right? Because as you expand the numbers of members, actually changing it, attempting to have third parties play a significant role, I think that only works when the stakes are lower, right? I think that's the problem right now, is that everyone. I mean, there's the quote from "So long and thanks for all the fish," um, from Douglas Adams, right? Where the question is, why do the people keep voting for one lizard or the other lizard, and the lizards are actually the minority. Why do they keep voting for the lizards? Well, it's because the wrong lizard might get in if they don't vote for this lizard, and that's sort of where we are in a whole lot of our elections, is that we're basically left not so much wanting to actually support someone that I want to see elected to office. It's, I've got to vote for this person because the alternative is this person. Um, I think there's and talk about confidence. If you go into the election knowing that I actually don't want either of these people, but I want that person less, well, I'm not increasing my confidence in our elected officials if I'm walking out of the polling place feeling like I need to take a shower, right? So
So, as I mentioned, or maybe I haven't mentioned on this show, but we plan to be a big tent, right? So Walter, Roger, we want to be able to bring both single member representation fans and multi-member representation fans into our tent and have a civil debate over this, just like our founders were able to do. So let's get it started. Roger, I'm going to let you go first. Single member, multi-member, what do you think's best?
Multi-member. If we did not face the gerrymandering that we faced, if we did not have a capped house, I might give a different answer. But personally, right now, there is no one elected to represent me who actually represents me in the state of North Carolina or in the Congress, right? There's no one I can turn to. If we had multi-member districts in a state like North Carolina, purple state, closely divided, I wouldn't be faced with only a slate of Republicans that are elected, in the area that I live. There would be a Democrat I could turn to that would take my call and listen to me.
So what if we uncap the House to 870?
Well, then I'd have a different calculus. I can't give you the answer right now, but it would affect my calculus, and I might come to a different result. I understand that these variables would affect my decision, but as things stand right now, we're electing people that don't win a majority of the vote and sending them off to, in some cases, they just give them a plurality, and we send them off to represent us.
What are you? You're a congressional representative? Give me an answer. I want to know now what you're going to do in the future, and I'm going to hold you to it. And then if you do anything different, I'm going to ridicule you on national TV, Roger. Come on, let's go.
and I'm going to say, do your worst, because congressional representatives get reelected at a rate of 95%, no matter how ridiculous and stupid they are. So I can say multi-member district, and I'll get reelected if I've already been elected once.
You make a good point, Roger. Walter, your turn. Single member, multi-member.
Oh man. So, my instinct is single member district. And it, when I was 13, I started working on my uncle's rice farm, and I would often go to him and be like, "Hey uncle, we've got a great idea. We want to fix this thing. We should do this thing." And he would look at me kind of confused and be like, "Well, who's we? Who is this we that's going to get that done? You want to do this? Great. You're in charge. You go get it done." And when I think of multi-member districts, that's what I think of, right? It's like, well, who do I call? I've got this problem, and there we got, however many people represent me. Who do I call? Who's actually my representative that is going to solve the problem that I've got with, FEMA and, the local state siting agency and this other person who's dealing with the disaster that I'm in.
The one that's not a lawyer, that's who I call.
Not a bad answer. Yeah, but I will, because I'm a lawyer. I'll give the other side a shot. I have 3 county commissioners, and 2 of them are less favorable to me than one of them. And so I call one of them, and that is a multi-member district, right? We got 1 county, we got 3 commissioners, and they represent all of us. And one of them I just have more affinity to. So I can kind of see how that could work, right? And so, my belief is that let's uncap the House. It's an event horizon over which we can't see. So, let's do that first, and then we'll talk about these other reform proposals after.
Yeah. And so if you want to read my thoughts on it, which again, I haven't fully solidified, but I've got a piece in the Vital Center that came out last week where I talk about single member and multi-member districts, and I give some personal experience of this and how I think it would work. You can go to vitalcenter.com, and I think it's .com. I should have checked that out before I got on the show. But Vital Center, if you Google it, you'll find it, and and you can find it on our Twitter page and my personal Twitter page at jmayhew. So
it's .org, and
.org.
Also
okay.
I'm quoted, so this is why it's so important that we get this right.
That's right.
I don't think either of those are right, actually, though. Neither vitalcenter.org or .com works.
It's the Vital Center.
Oh, the Vital Center. Oh my gosh, you have to add a "the." Well, you didn't say that.
Well, you made me add "the" to representation station, so it's just like we're Ohio State over here.
This is the representation station. By goodness. Okay,
All
so I mean, I gotta keep this going because now we're like stringing people along. Is it thevitalcenter.com? It is. Okay, thevitalcenter.com, and you can see a picture. Is that Watergate? Is the landing page picture of Watergate? I think it might
right.
be. Check it
Okay.
out.
So I'm gonna try to get through these. We got 2 more questions here. I know we're kind of bumping up against our time. Casey, are you okay to finish it out?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
Okay.
So I got my questions confused. This is my question I thought I was getting ready to ask last time, but also in Drutman's book, he suggests shifting America to a multi-party democracy by changing to proportional representation. Elon Musk has started a new party. Andrew Yang has started a new party. Do we need more than 2 parties?
Do we need more than 2 parties? I mean, I think just well, I'll put it this way. I think that is whereas uncapping the House is a statutory change. What would be required to move us to a multi-party country is one of 2 things: either a fundamental constitutional restructuring of the way that government works, because I think that's we have a system that basically, I think that's one thing that the founders missed, is that they were designing a system that naturally ended up creating a 2-party framework. The other possibility is make the federal government so completely boring that it's perfectly fine to play around with 3rd and 4th and 5th parties, because the stakes are very, very low. And if that's where we were, then I think, a multi-party system could work. If people basically just felt like it's these sort of secondary questions, and what really matters are the people that I elect close to me, in my home state or in my community, then it might work. But otherwise, you'd have to completely remake, I think, the American government. It's not just a matter of sort of coming up with the right lane for a 3rd party, and that's sort of back to the point. When everything is at stake, right? The civil liberties you care about are at stake. The fundamental makeup of your the culture is at stake. If people perceive it that way, then there's just no room for 3rd parties to have any place at the table in that conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So Roger, did you go first last time? I can't keep track. I need to write this stuff down.
It's my turn.
It's your turn. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh, and I'm just itching.
Okay, all right. So, would an uncapped House lead to more parties, and does America need more parties?
So I agree with Casey. To answer the latter part of your question, I don't think we need more parties. I think we need to uncap the House, and I think that the party that chooses to uncap the House will win for the next decade, and the other party will be fundamentally transformed, and that's what we need. And there might be an interstitial space after an initial uncap where new ideas surface in the form of new parties, but they're not real contenders. I don't think they're generators or solicitors of ideas, and so no, we do not need new parties. We need to uncap the House so that the current parties can facilitate basically a competitive edge against China, which is positioned to crush us. I'm a Republican. I'm going to be at the Republican State Convention lobbying hard on the inside of our party to reshape it, to push for uncapping the House, because I think if the Republican Party picks up this ball and runs with it, the Republican Party will dominate for the next, at least a decade. And all they have to do is figure that one simple fact out, and that's what they need to do. That's what I got.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Whoever picks this up, whichever party decides to embrace this more, which, by the way, has been the Democratic Party, and
That's
it's
right.
been in proportional representation, not in single member districts. So that's something to keep in mind. I think conservatives are typically slow to the table for reforms. They like things the way they are. They don't like to make big splashy headlines, and I kind of get that. I'm kind of like that in my personal life, but we're so far past needing this done that conservatives need to come to the table on this. They need to get on the ball, or they're gonna lose. And I think the whole MAGA new right populist movement that's taken over the Republican Party is it can take hold and it can be entrenched, or it can fade very quickly with a new idea. And you know what new ideas typically take hold in America? Where you give people power. And this gives people power. It gives them agency. It gives them a chance. And I didn't answer the question about parties, but I'm going to go to Roger. Roger, would an
I
uncapped house
would
lead to
like
more parties?
Flippy.
Go
I
ahead.
would like to see more parties. I think if we uncap the House at sufficient numbers, that they will organically bubble up. Walter used the term interstitial, meaning that for some period of time they would bubble up, but they wouldn't have legs. They wouldn't survive long term. I don't know that I agree with that. We'd have to wait and see how that would shake out. But I would like to see more than just 3 parties. I'd like to see 4 or 5. And my argument is this. Right now we have 2 parties and they spend all of their time fighting for the majority, none of their time fighting for the citizens. If there were no prospect of a durable majority, perhaps they would spend more time fighting for the citizens and less time fighting for that damn majority. And I think these parties would bubble up organically. The Greens would win some elections in the Bay Area or Madison, and Libertarians would win in Oklahoma and Idaho. And in this way, we could help to remarginalize the extremist voices that have hijacked our Congress right now. Greens would get theirs, Libertarians would get theirs. Maybe there'd be a Nazi party. Get all those extremists out in these fringe parties, so whatever's left can build coalitions and get stuff done. That's my take.
Yeah, I think extra parties at the state level, I think, would be an interesting idea. Maybe not necessarily at the federal level. Parties that represent more of their geographic area than a national, broader audience, I think, would be interesting. And I think that ultimately by uncapping the House, you create a space for new parties to exist. Right
Yes.
now we've got, like I mentioned, Andrew Yang's got the Ford Party. Elon Musk, I don't even know if he's serious with whatever he's doing. I can't
Doubtful.
take that guy seriously anymore. I'm sorry.
Agreed.
I try to
I
be
trust him even less than Congress.
like I want to go to Mars. Like I love the idea of going to space, and I've studied the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies of the world, and I can kind of see where he's coming from a degree, but I don't know, that guy's a little crazy. But I think you give an opportunity for them, and to Walter's point, whichever party picks this up and expands the House, the other party has the risk of going the way of the Federalists, right? The Federalists was a party, and it kind of faded away. The Democrats, the Democratic Republicans, the Republicans, they shifted to the Democrats, and then there was different parties, leading up into the Civil War before they all came together and formed the new Republican Party. And I think you could have something like that happen again by uncapping the House. All right, so let's get to our last question here. In Yuval Levin's book, right over there somewhere, A Time to Build, he embraces expanding the House. In Philip Wallach's book, Why Congress, which I forgot to put up, sorry, Philip, he embraces expanding the House. In Drubin's book, he embraces expanding the House. In Nuevo's book, he embraces expanding the House. And that Patrick Deneen guy that's like the leader of like the new right, whatever, he embraces expanding the House. This seems to be something that everybody from across the political spectrum seems to support. So
until they get in the club, until they get in the oligarchs club, and then they don't want nothing to do with it.
So my question to Casey is, how do we encourage people in Congress and those running for Congress to support this idea?
All right. So first of all, I am speaking in my personal capacity, since we're officially weighing in on the question of uncapping the House, which should be obvious, but nevertheless, Yeah. So first of all, Yuval Levin is a menace, because he believes everything that I believe, but he says it so much better than I could ever possibly hope to say it, that the man must be stopped. His book, I don't think I've ever read a book. His recent book, I read through the book. It was like, if you had sent me, yeah, American Covenant, if you had sent me that, if he had sent me a copy of that book and asked me to, like, propose edits, I would have had one of those situations where you're like, trying to find a comment somewhere that, like, you might use this word instead of that word here, just so I would have something to send him back to say, I promise I did read this. So I reflexively agree with Yuval. I mean, to me, look, I mean, a lot of arguments that have been made, and I share a lot of sympathy around a lot of those arguments on expanding the House. It's also just sort of consistent, I think, with the original um, understanding of what the founders were building, um, and I think in an important way. I mean, uh, one of the features of the Constitution was that the House and Senate were different chambers. They were differently constructed and had different purposes. We've lost some of that by the 17th Amendment, where we uh, started having the direct election of senators. I think that was a mistake. And I think that ought to be a process that is left to the state legislatures, which means that who you elect to your state legislature really, really matters, even for that purpose. Um, but now that we have an elected Senate, it makes it even more important that the House, um, if these are going to be different chambers, right now we run the risk that the House basically is just a much more frequently elected Senate, and that they're just two different chambers. Um, and if you the actual difference between their function is insignificant, and I think that's a problem. I think they need to look like different chambers. One way you can get to that, I know you're talking about a very small change in the House. Look, if you went to a very large House, we'd have to figure out where we put 9,000 members of the House if we wanted to have a an expanded House that actually reflected the founding era understanding of how many people that a member of Congress would represent, but would actually serve the function of, these are the people who are your representatives. And then there's this separate body that's the Senate, that's the sort of cooling saucer that's supposed to be there to make sure that these people will react in the House to your immediate desires and demands, and that is important in a democracy. And these other people over here will make sure that, okay, have we thought about this for like a couple of election cycles before we make a really fundamental change? And you put those two things together and you've got something. And that was the founding understanding. So I think a lot of good arguments, I think, that have been made already. But I think I would just add to it the idea that the House is supposed to be different from the Senate. So let's make the House different from the Senate.
So I think you're referencing. I think George Washington said to Thomas Jefferson, "It's told that the Senate is the saucer that cools the tea. It cools the
Right.
passions of the people." And right now, I think it just doesn't work right. But I have to push back on you here because you didn't answer my question.
Yeah.
How do we encourage people in Congress and those running for Congress to support this idea?
Yeah, I mean, this may be the kind of thing that requires more of a movement than anything else. I mean, that one of the arguments I've made to people before is if you look around at some of the people in Congress who you think of as crazy people, either on the right or the left, part of the problem is that they represent so many people that they're actually really relevant. Wouldn't it be great if they represented a couple of counties in a
Yeah.
very small state, and I, there would be no reason to even have that person on your late night talk show, because you wouldn't know who they are. And instead, you could have merit that could cause people to actually sort of rise to the top. Um, so I think there's that obviously would not be a compelling argument with specific members of Congress who like uh, basically being famous for the fact that they hold Congress and have 750,000 people or whatever it is who they theoretically represent. But for a lot of the others who think I have to serve alongside these people, I think that could be a positive. So.
All right,
in his defense, I think he did answer the question, Jeff. He said, if you want to run for the House to make it more different from the Senate. Don't be just another senator. It is a great argument.
Okay, all right. I don't know. Maybe I'll let him off.
You're probably going to have this. I think this is the kind of issue, Jeff, that you're probably going to have a movement to persuade people. Like, why should members of Congress vote to uncap the House? Because they actually fear losing elections if they don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just not going to be in their self-interest very often, right? Like, if you, particularly on the House side, Senate, maybe the Senate might look at them and say, yeah, we should bump these people down a notch or two. I could see people in the Senate being supportive of it, but I think members of the House are not going to think, wouldn't it be really, really great if my office was much, much, much smaller? That's not no, that does not sound like a great idea. I really like being really important and representing an entire half of the state or whatever. So
see, that makes no sense to me. I am the type of person that's like, an individual can only handle so much responsibility because we're all human, right? And the idea that they handle so much responsibility, in my eyes, if I was in that position, I'd be like giddy to give some of it away and be like, please come help me. Like, I don't want to do all this work.
People.
That's because I can't. There's too few of them.
The selection process is such that if you read the Federalist Papers, right, what they were worried about with the president was like they were just like, oh, the president obviously is going to be a narcissistic, crazy person. Like, who else would run for president other than a narcissistic, crazy person? That's why we must have, the House and the Senate and the Judiciary to like counteract the forces that will select for these like crazy narcissists. But it just turns out now that is all of the House and maybe most of the Senate. So that's not you, Jeff.
All right.
In your defense,
Roger, you get to go first this time. How do we get America talking about representation?
Brute force, by which I mean money, like everything else in the society. This is a capitalist society and money talks. We need to have enough money so that we can go on whatever the hell the morning news today, Good Morning, whatever I don't even know what the titles are anymore because I don't watch them. But go on the morning news and talk to the American citizen in their living rooms about this. We need to raise the money so that we can hire Lin-Manuel Miranda to write our musical about Washington or about Madison. It keeps changing. I can't keep up. And sell all those tickets and get people to the theaters and make that message. All of this happens when we have the money, so we just got to raise the money to build the megaphone to shout about it. I have everyone I've told about it, which is a number of people on like a 1-to-1 or small group basis. Everyone I've told about it is shocked and angered. We just need to tell more people.
Walter, how do we get America talking about representation?
Well, I mean, we're in a populist moment, so if we're just gonna feed the fury and the frenzy of Trumpism, you pitch them Casey's 8,000 or 9,000 seat house with a home base in Cincinnati, Ohio, in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Silicon Valley, probably. Hopefully that would be tempered by the well-reasoned voices like Yuval Levin, and we would wind up somewhere in the middle. But I agree with Roger. We obviously need money, but we also need people to be able to imagine this, taste it, see it, smell it. It needs to really touch base with them, and so I come back to the word representation because it does seem like it's got to be the buzzword, right? People are bitching and moaning about Trump or about the media or about immigration or whatever it is. You're concerned about the wrong thing. right? The fundamental unit of account in America is not the individual and it's not the community. It's about your representation. And that's it. So you want a voice? Great. You can yell in a protest, but if you want a real voice, if you want quality voice, if you want your voice to have reach, you need a representative that you trust and who trusts you. That's all there is. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good. You mentioned the name of my article there. Thank you. I should have mentioned that before. It's called "The New Buzzword is in America is Representation." Go check it out at the Vital Center.
.com.
.com. I'm very good at promoting myself, obviously. I mean, look, how do we get people talking about representation? I mean, I think the first step is educating them. I think most people talk about democracy, as I wrote in my book or in my article. You know, and democracy is a great thing, but it's not what exactly we are. We're a representative democracy. You're like Walter said, if you want your voice to have reach and have power, it's got to go through your representation. And right now, you just can't talk to them. And then to Roger's point, really the only way we're going to be able, and to Casey's point, if we're going to build that movement, yeah, we got to have money. People are going to have to donate, right? And I think, yes, show the website. There you go. You know, to the point, if you're out there and you're thinking like, I don't like to donate money to political organizations, I got to tell you a little secret here. That actually is more powerful. If you can bring in new money to the market, you can actually have more sway than before, because wherever their new money is, old money is going to chase after it because they don't want to get left behind. And again, this is a new money idea in an old money way. So this can kind of fuse people together, fuse different types of groups together. You can get your Casey Mattox, who apparently wants like a 9,000 seat house, which I think is just like crazy. And you can get your very moderate conservatives like Yuval Levin, who wants like a 660 house. And you can find somewhere in the middle. You can get that new money and that old money. We can build a movement, and we can go on. I believe the show's still called The Today Show, Roger. I haven't seen it either, but you know, like maybe we could go on there. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe Walter can go on there for us, because
meeting in the middle is like a 5,000 person house. Jeff, is that your proposal? As I understood it, then.
I don't know. Yeah. Look, I'm willing to talk about it. I think that if we want to get to 5,000, it's going to take 12 to 15 years to get to 5,000, and it maybe more. It's going to be incremental change. I think incremental change is kind of the best way to make any type of change. I'm not the type of guy who just jumps in the water. I like walk down the stairs into the pool. I like to get my body adjusted. So that's just me personally, but everybody has their own way. So, let the American people decide.
You're out of step with America, man. We don't do incremental change here. We let all the pressure build up for decades, and then we do the huge infrastructure bill, right? We couldn't do it for 50 years, and then we do $1.5 billion.
I jump in the water, but I hire an engineer to survey the depth of the water prior to jumping.
Look, if we actually follow through on eliminating the Federal Department of Education and multiple other federal agencies, think of all the building space that you've opened up for new members of the House to move right into, right? So that's your vehicle in the Department of Education. It's right there by the Capitol building. It's a wonderful place for new members to move into.
Yeah, I don't like that either. Washington, D.C.
But
it's going to be perpetually flooded in 30 years anyway. We need to build a new Capitol in the geographic center.
All I think about is
now we're getting hot right at the end.
Yeah, I like it. Well, I think Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati is the play, because you get Ohio on board, and or maybe Des Moines, I guess. But Des Moines, I don't know.
Well, the geographic center just gets away from this whole coastal elite crap, right? Then they're no longer coastal elites. Susie works at the Capitol, and I sat behind her in algebra class 20 years ago. So, right, it's a different thing.
Hey,
you do live in a coastal state, Roger.
Yes, I do. So what? I'm not elite.
Are you not elite?
It's a treasure or a big fancy organization. I'm telling you, it's sounding checking boxes.
I have graduate degrees too. I'm a professor, but I'm just folks. I ain't special.
Well, and I've made other proposals as well. I actually came up with this idea of expanding to, I think it was like a 1,300 member house, but then you divide the house into 3 different geographic sections, where you have one on the East Coast, one in the center, and then you keep the one in Washington. And the idea for that, for me, is to spread out the lobbyists that are influencing, right? Spread out the economic power of Washington. I tell my, growing up, I live right outside of DC, and I've had my small business for 20 years. And anytime the market's a little shaky, I always tell my employees, like, don't worry, we live next to the people that write the rules. We will be okay. It's the rest of the country that has to worry. And I think if you spread that out a little bit more, maybe it affects more people. But yeah. Well, Casey, thank you for coming on our show. This was
Absolutely.
a really great conversation. I'm going to give you a chance here if you want to, any last words, and then we'll go to Roger and then Walter.
No, thanks for having me on. This has been a question that I've been more than anything watching you guys discuss and discussing with some other folks, and the possibility. I think it's certainly an intriguing idea that needs to be part of the conversation right now. As we, I think people are more open to the idea. What needs to change in order to make government work correctly? And I think there's a long list of things that need to change. But I think this is certainly something that needs to be part of the conversation. So thanks for having me on. It's been great.
Roger, last words?
Thank you, Casey, for joining us. It's a pleasure. I always enjoy the guests. I get a lot of different perspectives, particularly for me. I'm an independent, sort of left-leaning, so I get a lot of stuff from the conservatives that we have on that I otherwise wouldn't be exposed to. I'm not a big podcast listener, so I thank you for sharing your perspectives. And this is part of the reason I'm so anxious to participate on these every Monday night.
Walter.
Yeah. Thank you, Casey. I think you have one of the best X accounts out there, so everyone should go check it out. Give them a follow. I'll give a quick tip. He mentioned So Long and Thanks for the Fish. For those that don't know, that is the 4th book in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which will bring me back to Elon Musk. This is, I think, famously his favorite set of books. And despite, some fun that gets poked around, I am genuinely thankful, because I'm not sure that I would have a platform to say and do what I'm doing without him having taken some of the risks that he has. And to that end, without risk, there is no reward. And so to the folks who are listening, who are considering whether or not we should uncap the House or not, I think the fundamental question that you must ask yourself is inaction on this front more risky than action? Which is to say, is reform by the current set of Congress people more risky than reform by a new set of Congress people that the people might trust? I believe it's the latter. I believe that if you try to build a house upon the sand, it will eventually crumble. Find bedrock. It is in representation. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, Casey, thanks for coming on the show. For the listeners out there, thanks for tuning in. As we've mentioned before, we need a movement. As Casey mentioned, we got to raise money. We got to get people on board talking about this issue. It starts with education, and you can learn more at www.y435.org. You can go there. We put up a representatives reading list. It's got almost all of those books on there right now. I'll be adding more as I get time. Your donations will help me have more time to write and put more content out for you. I've also put all the episodes of the Representation Station up there, so you can find them. You can go to our website and find any episode that we mentioned tonight. If you want to go back and listen to the Brad Smith episode or the episode with Chris and Jacob from last week, I think they're great episodes. Lots of great information in there for those who want to learn and be involved. And I got involved in politics in a lot of ways because I felt powerless as an individual citizen. And then the more I learned about politics, the more I learned that I was powerless in a lot of ways. And what I've learned since joining with Walter and Roger is that you can kind of make your own power. You can carve your own destiny, and you can make change. It takes hard work, it takes dedication, and it takes compromise and teamwork. And I think that's what we're trying to build here at No Cap Fund. So please join us on this journey. Again, the website is www.y435.org. You can sign up to volunteer. You can sign our declaration for representation, and you can make a donation. So, as always, peace, love, and representation.
And representation.
Thank you for tuning in to the Representation Station. Don't forget to visit our website at www.y435.org and sign the Declaration for Representation. And don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on X at No Cap Fund, on Facebook, No Cap Fund, on YouTube at Uncap the House, and on Instagram at No Cap Fund. Thank you, and don't forget, peace, love, and representation.